Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Kaizen Synergy Legal Compliance webinar on the coronavirus and Australian workplace laws series. My name is Nihal Samara. I'm the General Counsel and Legal Director here, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's session. Today's session focuses on a number of key obligations in actually having staff and personnel return to work. It is an important step as things are changing around the country and rules and obligations that you need to know about are changing seemingly each week. What we are finding though is as agencies are seeing different laws around COVID relax, there is new obligations on agencies to really be across what they need to know about and how they actually need to manage it. What we are finding is that there is an increased responsibilities on being placed on employer agencies and rules that you need to know about in order to step these items through when people do return to work, either because they have had COVID or new things are actually coming up, which I will talk to you about shortly. So we are seeing a lot of changes. There's also, and we do need to acknowledge this, a number of state and Commonwealth elections all coming up this year. And no doubt that is also starting to play into what we are actually seeing in some of the public health responses. Equally, there are media releases from human rights commissioners and other regulatory bodies questioning the validity of chief health officers, pandemic responses, and other challenges that are occurring also at Fair Work level with commission investigations and the likes, and also safe work. So there is a lot of, I'm going to say, rules and investigations that are happening and court cases that are coming up. What we are seeing, though, is agencies sort of throwing their hands up and saying, well, what do I need to know about? What do you as an agency actually need to know, and what do you actually need to follow in terms of meeting your COVID compliance obligations? And so this is what the series that we are running. We will continue running these up over the next probably 4 to 6 weeks in terms of the sessions that we are running out. And each week we will update the slides of what you need to know about, and also resources as well too. So this has been a little bit of a longer introduction than what I normally give, but it gives you the scene of where we're actually heading. As always, we'd like to pay our respects to the elders past and present upon the lands on which we all meet. While this session is being run by webinar, we do pay our respects to the traditional owners accordingly. Now, one of the areas that we will be covering off today is focusing on returning to work and the workplace, and what is it exactly that you need to have in place. In the past webinars, we have covered off vaccinations, when workplaces shut quickly because of agency lockdowns, and also last week covered off paid leave and stand-downs. And I'll just review very briefly the slides that we covered off last week. Next week, we're going to be looking at risk, health and safety in the workplace, and then the following weeks looking at alternative work arrangements and also ending employment and redundancy obligations as well too. Now, what we are seeing, especially in this space from a legal compliance perspective, is this. When we unpack one topic, what we are finding is that you need to then look at other key areas of this. And when we looked at this for the first slide around vaccinations, continuing testing and resolving workplace issues and the likes, what we found that any one of these topics also then opened up another set of legal issues that your agency needed to consider. So as we're going through this, we're going to give you some real life case examples of what agencies exactly like yourselves have done. These sessions are focused specifically for not-for-profit and community service organizations. The rules apply whether you're a small agency of literally one or two people, or whether you have a large number of volunteers, right across the agencies, working across multiple states, with hundreds of employees as well too. So it does, the rules that we're talking about here do span across your different size agencies. That said, I will add that any of the resources that we do set up today will be made available directly on our Gemba 360 dashboard. Our law firm has been running the legal compliance dashboard. You can see it here. It has a number of different modules that allow you to essentially manage all of your not only COVID compliance obligations, but also risk management, HR, document management, a whole range of resources that you can access and actually utilize as well too. You will be sent the login details, which you can go to by simply going to gemba360.com. You will be given your username and password to access all the resources, and you can jump straight in and access your Gemba COVID legal compliance dashboard, which has a range of policy templates, which we'll talk about. We do update these from week to week, which gives you access to these resources. You've also got access to things like the past webinars in the Gemba 360 College, and also the HR module, which allows you to manage all of your internal legal compliance and COVID safe obligations from a personnel point of view as well too. And it'll also send you out the reminders that you can also access from week to week as we run these sessions. So let's have a look. Essentially, the recommendations straight up for you to look at is this. And for those of you that have joined us from week to week, we do put our list of recommendations up. So that way you're across exactly what you need to know and what you're looking to get out of this webinar as well too. So firstly, review the employer tool checklist and legal audit tool. This is particularly important when we talk of returning to work and also having staff coming into your agency that have maybe been COVID positive. And when I say may have been COVID positive, we're now moving into a phase where people potentially could not have COVID, but have what's classed as long COVID, where they may be displaying some of the symptoms of having COVID, for example, fatigue or coughs and the likes, but they're actually testing negative to COVID when they do have things like the rat test done and the like. So what we are saying is review the employer tool checklist that we will show you, as well as the legal audit tool that we have on here. And these are actually pulled from Fair Work, Safe Work, and a number of other regulatory agencies, which I will come to. So we also suggest that you review these slides and update any of your policy documents that you need to do. Equally, if you do have any questions, just reach out to our law firm, either on the 1300 number listed here or on 0413 699 515, which is my direct mobile number. If you do have any questions throughout today's legal session, by all means, please use the chat group or the questions panel, and we will get to them as we move through today's session. So essentially last week, what we did look at, just going back, was when workplaces shut quickly because of a lockdown, as well as pay and leave stand downs. And just to review this to lead into this week's session, essentially we covered off all of these individual areas around lockdowns. We looked at checking how to check your restrictions, stand downs and enforceable government directions, as well as working from home, how to and what the rules are about taking care of children if they do need to stay home as a directive coming out of the school, and also border closures, as well as financial support and mental health support as well. Equally, we did take apart, similarly what I spoke to you before, around when agencies shut down because of lockdowns, as well as pay and leave, and how this essentially creates a number of legal issues that we unpacked moving forwards last week. We also covered off around the stand downs, what your agency does need to consider We could also cover off the Fair Work checklist as well too. And what we had done was actually provide you with, or provide attendees with a supplementary employer checklist, which was a Word document that actually allowed you to actually use it as I'm going to say, a yes or no type tick box approach. Excuse me, while we just jump around, let's hold it there. Thank you. And so with this, essentially, you are able to then use this within your agency as part of what you need to do if you were to consider a employee stand down, and what measures you should have in place in order to meet some of these, firstly, legal obligations, but do it in a way that didn't breach any fair work or other compliance-based obligations. And so we added to this around the Fair Work checklist in terms of some of the legal areas that we thought, from legal advice that we've given other not-for-profit agencies, things that you should consider. Equally, we looked at working from home and what the obligations are, as well as record keeping and also compliance obligations in relation to things like the Document Management and Crimes Act, where you are obligated under, let's say, for example, in Victoria, the Crimes Act, where you need to ensure you do keep documents that could be used in legal proceedings at some stage in the future, which opened up a whole discussion around post-it notes and other documents that people may store at home as well as going to work, taking care of children, carers leave, and the definitions of unexpected emergencies and how you would actually manage quarantine and self-isolation for staff, as well as the capacity to actually change work hours and duties as well too. We did also then lead into this week's session, which was around returning to work and the workplace. Now, where we're heading with this today is really around what Fair Work says is to encourage employers and employees to work together as they transition back to work. What we're finding at the moment is that there is a lot of confusion by workplaces around what their employment obligations are to staff in essentially having them return to work, either because they have been COVID positive or they've had long COVID, and also what if they've had to care for children, but they themselves are not COVID positive. Well, essentially, when we look at workplaces, and this is a diagram that we've used a few times in previous sessions, is that it's important to still have a COVID safe plan within your agency. The COVID safe plan should still continue to have the cleaning obligations, the record keeping obligations, the policies that are covered, and what your expectation is for all of your personnel as well too, and cover off things like density quotients and the like. So it is very heavily, and I can see a question's just come up here, that is it really focused on work health and safety legislation? And the short answer is yes. So you'll see that a lot of the focus now is shifting back onto employers and agencies, and the obligations are coming really at it from a work health and safety perspective. So what are you doing within your agency to minimize COVID within your workplaces? And remember, workplaces isn't just office spaces, but it can also be workplaces defined as events that you may run, or also if you are providing outreach services directly into other clients' homes as well too. So some of the key areas that should be in a COVID safe plan is these particular topics here. We're looking at what it should cover in terms of workplaces, but also home-based and working from home arrangements, what capacity you may want to limit, what record keeping processes you need to have in place, and we've summarized some of these here, whether face masks do need to be continued or when you should be using those, as well as signage and cleaning as well. So from a COVID safe point of view, it's important to actually have some of these topics covered off. And I'll show you what one looks like throughout the session. What we are going to be looking at is opening, scaling up operations, and adapting your workplaces. So these are the three lenses that we're actually going to be working through throughout the short webinar today in terms of returning to work. So when we've looked at the Fair Work site, and a lot of this information is taken directly off the Fair Work website, but what we are going to do is also add to this in terms of some of the legal compliance areas that we're going to comment on. We're also going to add to this from the Safe Work website as well too, and draw out a single source set of documents for yourselves to be able to utilize as well too. So Fair Work essentially encourages employees and employees to work together as people transition back to the workplace. So this means planning for employees starting to work again after may have been stood down, making changes to start times or finish times, returning to work at their usual workplaces when they have been working from home or another location, and also communicating clearly about what the plans are and how to address issues or concerns. I will add that some agencies have also added in specific communication plans and the likes of what they need to cover. Now, what we have also noticed in the Fair Work options here is that they do ask you to look at transitioning staff back or personnel back, setting up alternative work options and arrangements as well, and also managing the process to return people to work based on a formal checklist that they have. Now, one of the checklists that they've actually utilized, and we've actually loaded in, and we will circulate this round, that works quite well, is the Fair Work, and I'll just make this slightly bigger for us to look at. Essentially, the checklist that we've got essentially looks at checking public health directions, firstly looking at whether you've got a COVID safe plan in place in order to meet your work health and safety obligations, and you can see this here, as well as checking the rules about any vaccinations that you may need to have for the relevant staff member. Asking when you've actually talked to employees and what questions they've actually arised, and a Fair Work essentially asks you to work through this checklist. What we have done on your Gemba dashboard is load this checklist in. Now, rather than just having a single form tick box approach, what we have suggested that you actually do is utilize the checklist on your Gemba dashboard on the left-hand side. And you can see this here. Now, one of the things that does come up is around, rather than just using a checklist, is around what are the questions that were actually raised? How did you address any issues that staff or your personnel raised? It doesn't matter if you're a small agency of up to 5 people or an agency with an HR department that spans 300 or 400 odd staff. These rules apply to yourselves as well too. Do have staff shown a demonstration about what your policies are, what you need to consider, and when you essentially need to do it. So essentially, when you're reopening, working through this return to work checklist and having those documentation information available is really important that you actually manage this very carefully. What I will add to this is that when you actually open up the checklist tool, what you'll find, and I'll just bring this up and an example of this up here, of what you can see, you'll find that essentially it might also include a screening part as well too, to make sure that people are COVID symptom free. What you'll view is that on the right-hand side, you've got a series of audit logs, and the audit logs actually says when you actually did a task, what the date and the time, and what changes you made or information you sought. So essentially, if you were to be audited by a Fair Work investigator or a Safe Work investigator as well too, you've got the capacity to go into your Gemba dashboard, not only show them that you've completed the form, but also automatically it will record the date and the time like a journal or a diary log. And it'll save you the time from doing it. If you go back and actually change the form, so let me bring this up as an example here, and I'll actually go in and actually just mark this as a no, and I'm just going to save this form again too. So I've made a small change, but an important change to this form. I can then go back in, and when I look at the audit log again, you'll see the date and the time of what I changed as well. It also means that within the form, and this is why it's important, if I go in and let's say I scroll down and I'm going to go in here and say, I have viewed a new policy and shown it to the staff member. I know I am going into some detail here to show you how this works, but the purpose of this is to actually be able to track this information down when it has been done. And so let me save this. And now I'm going to go back into the audit log. And when I click on audit log, what comes up is the date, the time that was what was changed, and also what was actually changed within the form. Now, for agencies, this is a really invaluable tool to use, because what you have is under each of these forms, any changes, if your agency is returning to work, you've got the capacity to run down, review, and audit, I'll say, staff or personnel. Even if you're a small business or a large business, these rules apply, and you can actually show what you've done and when, rather than having just the checklist tool on its own. So essentially where this comes in, and you'll find that we're going to build off this tool very, very quickly. You've got essentially the Fair Work obligations, and you've got the tool listed on your Gemba dashboard. Now, what Fair Work also do say to agencies is that all employees are required to take care of the health and safety and welfare of workers, your clients, visitors at your workplace. And this is something that is not new because of COVID. It's been something that has been there. And so employers and employees have to consider all of their obligations under work health and safety laws in your state and territory when reopening. And this obviously includes COVID-19 vaccinations, physical and social distancing, cleaning and hygiene, and risk assessment. So it's all the stuff that I just mentioned before that should be in your workplace plan, or work COVID safe plan. And Safe Work Australia has information on a range of guidance around WH laws, but it creates another checklist that you also need to do. So what we have done for agencies is essentially start joining all these different regulatory checklists together. So now you've got one checklist that you can actually use and essentially say, right, have I thought of all the different things that I need to have in place when either reopening or having a personnel return to work, whether they've had COVID positive, whether they've been COVID positive, or one of their family members, or they've had to support one of their, for example, children and the likes. So again, when you've had these tools around it, we've added the different tools together. You all have access to these resources as well too. And it means then that it takes the guessing game out of whether you are compliant or not. And it will actually give you the assessments and options on what you need to do in order to meet your minimum legal compliance obligations as part of this. So when you look at resolving issues when returning to work, from time to time, clearly issues can arise. And so Fair Work encourages employees to find solutions that benefit both the workplaces. Now, some of these things can be quickly and easily resolved around it, but what happens if it's not? Well, essentially what you do need to look at, and again, what Fair Work push on people, is around the health and safety. And there is what is reasonable to require employers to essentially do. And essentially it focuses on work health and safety and protecting employees and clients and staff from COVID. So essentially, once employees start returning to the workplace, it's important to make sure that they obviously don't have COVID-19. And one of the clear tools that agencies have used is this COVID-19 assessment form. And you can see it on the Gemba dashboard. It's also available on mobile device as well too. And so what people do is essentially screen themselves, and agencies, like some agencies that have been using this for the last couple of years, that may be large health services, have some 40,000 plus entries that they might have. And every time a staff member checks in or comes into the office, they literally spend the best of 30 seconds running through this form, completing it and submitting it. And what you've then got is a screening tool to say, right, when's the last time they've done it? Great, Fred's done it on this date. Okay, we can see it here at on this date and a time, and they're working in. And what it gives you is the ability to very quickly check to make sure that no one is displaying any symptoms and the likes as well too. Now, once a stand down is lifted, Fair Work then have issued on top of this as well too the consultation and cooperation around the best practice guide as well. And we'll also be sending this information out to you as well. Now, with this, when you do look at all of these requirements as well too, you not only have the Fair Work checklist, Safe Work checklist on top of this, but then agencies are also meant to have a look and work through also the consultation and cooperation as a minimum requirements. Now, with this, there are a range of different case studies that is included within this document. It actually is quite a nice document to use, but again, it's all sort of taken across, and some of the resources is around having the discussions on difficult issues and challenges. What we have unpacked from this is the what, who, how, and when to actually respond. What we have seen over the last number of months is an increase in agencies or staff that have been stood down, rapidly trying to seek fair work actions and trying to take information to the Commission and the likes. What we have done is actually set up policy documents within your dashboard that actually include some of these best practice guidelines, and you can have access to this as well too. And it means then that you're following some of the clear areas on what to actually do in terms of the checklist requirements, and where you need to look at different policy documents, have you updated these as well. And so what we've actually said was where you may need to look at alternative work arrangements, and look, some of these things may not apply to all of your staff, and they may not apply to your agency, but at least this way you've actually just considered what some of your employment options are when staff are actually returning to work. And these may include things like changing or staggering start times, rotating work shifts, or even hours of duties and the likes as well. It is important that you do keep records of all the discussions that you have had, and which is why we keep on focusing on utilizing the forms on Gemba, because essentially any discussions that you have is provided with a date and timestamp, and it also then means it takes the guessing game out of what has been done and when. Also with this, the directions on returning to work is that you can provide quite strict directions to employees and personnel on returning to work. And this includes when they have had to work from home because of supporting their dependents, or like children, for example, or if you've had to give them alternative work arrangements as well. We have had some cases where staff and personnel do believe that they are simply entitled to actually continue working from home, and they no longer need to actually come into the office. And agencies have asked us a series of questions on this as well too, around, well, can you actually essentially mandate personnel to actually return from home? And in some cases, the answer is yes. But again, you just need to work through what these directions are and how to essentially do it. Again, when employees refuse to return to work, Fair Work are actually focusing on work health and safety issues. It's not the only issue, but it seems to be the focus of what they're actually looking at as well. It means then that in some circumstances, employees may be able to refuse to return to work because of a reasonable concern about their health and safety or another legitimate reason. And it's important that your agency be aware of this. Now, how we've actually managed this with agencies quite directly is to have policy documents that cover off what your work health and safety obligations are and having a return to work policy in place. What this allows you to do is essentially unpack this before all of these issues arise. We have seen this come up with agencies, and it has worked incredibly well to essentially have these policies in place. And you do have access to some of these in your Gemba dashboard as part of your templates. Now, if an employee doesn't comply with the direction to return to the workplace, then there are steps that you need to follow. And quite simply, it is about recording and discussing their concerns. It's about taking appropriate action and answering these questions that they might have, but also giving them timelines and the frame of which you need to essentially do, you expect things to happen. With that, there may well be times that after you've done this, you can take termination as part of that process, but you do need to ensure that you do comply with general protections and unfair dismissal obligations under the Fair Work Act. And of course, if you do have any questions, you can contact our law firm about these as well too. Sometimes, well, not sometimes, often, more often than not, we're actually working with agencies around stepping through this process and raising when they have raised quite specific and unique questions that applies to their agency. At other times, it is quite broad, and agencies have said, look, what have we actually done with other agencies in terms of supporting employees returning to the workplace, and what's the process that they've followed. And hence the reason that we run these webinars to cover some of these things off. As employees return to work, employers may need to make changes to their usual duties because things may be operating differently. And before making any changes, employers should check whether there are any rules applicable, such as any awards, agreements, or other employment contracts. Now, if an employee can't return to work to the workplace because they need to take care of a child whose school or child centre is closed, or alternatively, now children are testing positive to COVID, and they have to, in some schools, have to essentially have a negative rat test before they actually return to work, then employees who need to care for a sick child can take carers leave, paid or unpaid. And if a full-time or part-time employee has no paid carers leave left, they can request to take unpaid carers leave as well too. And casual employees, it's important to note, are entitled to 2 days of leave per occasion. So what we have seen is that there are a number of key areas that you need to follow as part of returning to work. One of the questions that has come up that agencies have said, can we just expand what long COVID is? Well, essentially long COVID is when people are may have had COVID or are testing negative to COVID, but they are displaying the symptoms of COVID itself. So essentially, many people are experiencing health difficulties for several months after they have been infected with COVID-19. With it, we are seeing this being developed a lot in the UK at the moment, where common symptoms include for 12 weeks, may include fatigue, breathing problems, headaches, changes to heartbeat, nausea, persistence, sleep problems as well too, or mood changes as well. So essentially what we are seeing is that some agencies are finding that staff are actually seeking medical certificates for long COVID, even though they don't have any of they're not testing positive to it. So from an HR and personnel perspective, a lot of agencies are asking, well, what do we actually do during this period of time? So it is something that we have said, follow the existing guidelines of what we're talking about here. looking at post-COVID syndrome, what support can be provided by agencies and how you're going to manage this as well too. And equally also looking at return to work processes based on symptoms that people may have. But it is something that we will continue to unpack as we move through the following week's session. All of these resources are available on your Gemba 360 dashboard. I know that our support desk, Ruby and Lynette in particular, will be reaching out to all of the attendees today to ensure that you do have access, can find the resources. And if you would like, and I can see a few questions coming in around one-on-one meetings, just to ask questions and also go through some of the legal resources as well too. So yes, certainly we will be opening these out. We will be sending out the legal resources, including these slides as well too, to all attendees that are joining us. If you do have any questions, we will open up the phone lines. More than happy to stay online and answer any questions that you may have. Next week, we will be moving on to managing risks and organizational health and safety. If you are watching this recording after today's live session, thank you for joining us today. If you do have any questions, by all means, reach out to us on 1300 360 360 or email us at support@gemba360.com.